Today, you're going to learn how to speak clearly and confidently, and I'll show you a specific method that you can use to back up everything you say with evidence. This is part 4 in a 5-part series on how to speak clearly and confidently. I'll put links to the entire series below once all 5 parts are posted. Let's now learn to use the PREP talking points. PREP is an acronym, which you probably know I don't like, so let me quickly explain this. When you have something important to say, do it in this order. State your point of view. Next, give a reason for your point of view. And then you give a concrete example or other evidence that illustrates your point of view. When you add even a little bit of evidence like this, you'll sound much more confident and persuasive. And then you restate your point of view at the end to show that you've finished your talking turn. I consider the second P in the PREP method optional depending upon the situation and the length of your message. We'll talk through some examples in a moment, but first, the PREP method and talking points comes from the world of impromptu speaking. In the real world, the PREP points are useful for any kind of group meeting situation, high-stakes conversation, or during a Q&A session where you have 2 simultaneous goals. First, you want to sound clear and concise and confident, but second, you also want to make sure you support what you say with evidence and stay on track while you do it. You can use this for a message that's as short as 3 sentences, or let's say 15 to 20 seconds, or you can develop it a bit into a 30 to 45 second message. Let's walk through this. Here are the first 2 examples of how I would sound in an everyday conversation. For these first 2 examples, we'll do the short version of about 15 seconds or so, and I'll leave off the optional P at the end because it's really not necessary for a message this short. Here's my first example. Pickleball is now one of the most popular sports around, and I think we should get on board. One reason for its popularity is that anybody at any skill level can play. For example, I have a friend who is 80 years old and plays couples with her husband, but when her grandchildren visit, they all play together. Here's another example of what that would sound like in a professional situation. We'll pretend we're in a group meeting with your team and we're talking about what vendor your team should work with moving forward. It's now your turn to voice your opinion, and you're going to use the PRE points. For example, you could say, I recommend we hire vendor A because we already know they do quality work and they're easy to work with. Our last project with them, for example, came in under budget and a month ahead of schedule. In mere seconds, you can use the PREP method to express yourself clearly and confidently and back up what you say with a concrete example. Let's do some additional fine-tuning so we can really understand each point here, and that will also help us expand this to a 30 or 45-second message. The first P is pretty straightforward. This is where you express your point of view, position, or opinion about a subject. This is your bottom line. In school, you might call this your thesis statement. My tip for the P is that this is what you would say if you were only allowed to say what you thought in one concise sentence. Next, the R stands for reason. This is where you will give a clear explanation of why you have that point of view in the first place. This answers a question listeners will usually ask themselves before they realize it. They might be thinking, for example, well, why do you believe that? To make it bulletproof, the way I coach my clients is to literally use words like because, or start with the phrase, the reason is. When you start with those lead-in keywords, you will usually be able to find the rest of the words to offer a clear reason for your point of view. That's exactly what I did for my previous examples. When I talked about the popularity of pickleball, I used the lead-in phrase, one reason. For the professional example, I said I wanted to do business with vendor A, and I signaled that I was giving a reason by using the keyword because. So my tip for the R, the reason, is that if you're not sure how to explain why you have that point of view, use keywords like reason or because as you draft your message, and that will usually help you state your reason more clearly. With that in mind, let's talk about how to turn this into a 30 to 45 second message. For a slightly longer message like this, the first 2 steps, the P and the R, stay exactly the same. You should still express your point of view in one sentence and give your reasons in 1 or perhaps 2 very concise sentences. But as mentioned, the E stands for example or evidence. In my earlier illustrations, my examples were quite short, but a longer message usually means providing additional examples or evidence. The E is really the only talking point in prep that you can expand without repeating yourself. And to transition to your examples, just use the lead-in phrase, for example, and then immediately share your illustration or other evidence. For pickleball, I could have added additional examples to make this into a longer message. I originally gave examples about how my 80-year-old friend plays, and they also play with their grandchildren. But let's say I was sharing this message with my local Parks and Recreation department and leaders, and I wanted to convince them to add some pickleball courts to our community center. For that audience, I would add some other evidence in the form of statistics and other information. I would have shared that the Association for Pickleball Professionals shows that over 36 million Americans now play the sport. It's now more popular than tennis. I would have mentioned that the cost of pickleball is less than half of what it costs to play tennis. I would have mentioned that 3 nearby towns now have dedicated pickleball courts and leagues. You'll notice that each additional piece of information and evidence is unique, and that's really important. Make sure each example adds new information so that you don't simply repeat yourself and get long-winded. I could do the same thing with my example about hiring vendor A. I would add additional examples and evidence that back up my message without repeating myself. So to expand a prep message to between 30 and 45 seconds, the only point you expand on is the E by adding more examples and evidence. The other talking points stay exactly the same. But now because your message is a bit longer, this justifies adding the second P to the end. This is where you restate your point of view. The second P, if you think about it, functions as a one-sentence mini conclusion for your message. You might reword the second P a little differently than the first, but it must reiterate your original point of view to show that you're finished talking. I would say, and that's why I believe we should get on board with pickleball. Or, to me, vendor A is the right choice. To summarize, use the PRE points if you have a brief message to share and want to support that with evidence. And use the entire prep method with the second P if you have a slightly longer message and want to support everything you say with additional examples and more evidence. Both are extremely tight ways to make a point, and you now know how to express yourself clearly and confidently and back up everything you say without getting long-winded. I encourage you to take a look at my website at all the free resources we have there, like the class on the top 5 communication skills that every professional should have. I'll put links to that below and to my Communication Coach Academy, so you can take a look at that while you're there. We have classes and other group coaching options as well. And stick around for the 5th and final part of this series. In that next video, we'll talk about how you can speak with more conviction in everything you say. Till next time, thanks, God bless, and I will see you soon.